Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, more people are being diagnosed with autism than ever before. But many still don't understand what autism really is, or they base their perception on celebrity-driven or outdated information. So how do we change the conversation? Our guest digital producer, Anousheh Hossain, is here looking out for your live feedback. When she's not with us, she's blogging at anoushehspoint.com. So, Anousheh, this photo went viral, and it really gives people a glimpse into the minds of how things that are so simple may affect a person with autism.
Exactly, Lisa. It's so sweet. This picture of this girl went viral on Mashable, and basically she loves cheeseburgers. It's her favorite thing to eat, and her family go regularly to Chili's and they get cheeseburgers. But they recently went and she didn't want to eat her cheeseburger, and it turns out it was because the cheeseburger was cut in half. So they sent the burger back, they got a whole one, and this is the image that her family took of her kissing the whole cheeseburger. So it's a great example of how people with autism may see things, and it's really about the details and the nuances. So of course this is a live show. We want to hear from you. If you at home want to join the conversation, tweet me using the hashtag AJStream.
Before we get started, I want to say that our goal for this show is to not be a typical program about autism. Our guests are each uniquely qualified to speak to different elements of today's conversation. To start, the man to my left is Ari Ne'eman. He is the president and co-founder of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, and he himself has Asperger's syndrome, which is a form of autism. Ari serves on the National Council on Disability, where he advises Congress and President Obama on policy issues. Ari, really great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on the program.
Today we're also going to feature guests through our Google Plus Hangout. Of course, you too can hang out with us. Just go to the link at the bottom of the page and add us to your circles.
I'm Shalina Jan Mohammed, and I'm the author of Love in a Headscarf, and I'm in the stream.
No two persons with autism are alike, but more people are being diagnosed with it than ever before. In the U.S., that's 1 in 54 boys and 1 in about 250 girls. Finding the resources to help families and individuals who are touched by autism is a challenge in the U.S. and around the world. Nobody knows exactly what causes it, but the latest research points to a number of possibilities. The key, experts say, is early diagnosis to help individuals develop a plan for living with autism. But as research advances, there are still many misconceptions, and some in the autism community feel left out of the conversation altogether. So we asked those who've been touched by autism what they want people to know about it. Take a listen.
Hi, my name is Sean. I have autism.
That's my brother, Sean Michael. He is autistic. And I just want everyone out there to know that autism, we think of it in my family as so much more of a blessing than a curse.
Autism doesn't only change the life of the person diagnosed, but the people, the family, and the people who love them too are affected.
My debate partner in high school had Asperger's syndrome, but he helped us reach the highest levels of competition. People with autism can be invaluable partners, colleagues, and friends.
Each of our guests today brings a unique perspective to the autism discussion. On Skype, we have Steve Silberman, an investigative reporter for Wired magazine, who's written extensively on the subject and has a book on it coming out next year. Joining us in our Google Plus Hangout is Dr. Felice Orlick. She's the Director of Community Outreach at the Seattle Children's Hospital Autism Center. Stuart Duncan is a blogger and autism activist. And Shannon Rosa is a senior editor for The Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. Felice, Stuart, and Shannon are also the parents of children with autism. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. So Ari, I want to start with you. What does it mean to be autistic?
Well, autism is a developmental disability, and it's one with a tremendous amount of diversity. There are autistic people who can speak, like I can, and there are many autistic people who can't. There are autistic people with average or above average intelligence, and there are autistic people who experience intellectual disability as well. Now, there are a lot of different attributes of autism. The two major ones that feature in the diagnostic criteria are challenges or differences in social communication and focused interests. But many of us experience a number of other attributes like sensory hypersensitivities, and
to
other
light
experiences.
or to sound or
light, sound, texture, any number of other things. For us, though, we tend to look at our experiences as part of a broader autistic experience as a minority group, as people with disabilities, but also as a minority group. We have a lot in common, despite the tremendous diversity in experience and outcomes on the autism spectrum. And that's part of what's driven the rise in the self-advocacy, autistic people speaking for ourselves, and the neurodiversity movement in recent years.
So is that perspective vastly different than the way autism is traditionally viewed?
Yes, yes. So historically, autism has been viewed as some kind of alien force coming in and taking a previously normal child and turning them into something less than an autistic child. And that's not really how we experience our lives. You know, people do not wake up in the morning and experience their very existence as a tragedy. Many of us experience tragic things happening to us, unemployment, discrimination, any number of other things. But to us, being autistic is part of who we are. And what we need to be doing is driving a conversation not about cure or causation or how to make a world without autistic people, but instead, how do we make a world in which autistic people are included and supported, and we have the same opportunities as our non-autistic peers?
Ari, our online community is picking up on this theme that you just mentioned. Jeffrey says, autism spectrum disorders are little understood. What qualifies to fit the category are largely unknown. Awareness will breed support. I also have this great blog here that I want to show our viewers, Emma's Messiah, Miracle of Music, which is completely a testament to what you were saying about people with autism speaking for themselves. And I have a great quote here from Emma. She says, acceptance is not working for our agency, school, or medical practice, or social agency that is for disabled and speaking like we don't understand or even exist. I am somebody with feelings that deserve respect. So would you agree that with the influx of technology and blogging and social media, many people with autism now are being able to speak for themselves?
That's absolutely the case. You know, let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, an Australia-based autism charity decided to do an autism fundraiser that was really something about us without us. It was called Communications Shut Down, and they were asking people, in our opinion, quite offensively, to shut down their social media usage for a day to simulate the silence of being autistic. And this is, you know, a good example of how historically people have talked about our experiences without having us at the table. But thanks to the rise of the autistic self-advocate community, people were prepared to respond. Two autistic bloggers, Corina Becker in Canada and Catherine Bjornstad in the United States, organized something called Autistic Speaking Day, and it's still celebrated every year. In November. We have a growing number of holidays in the autistic community. We're right in the middle of Autism Acceptance Month now. And the idea is that those of us on the spectrum will speak out with our own voices, whatever means of communication we're going to be using, and ensure that our message is the one that should be viewed at the center of our national and international conversation about autism.
Felice, I want to get to you. Talk to us about what is really medically understood about autism, and then frame this up for us. I mean, Ari is talking about people with autism speaking out with their own voice. In the world of autism, how many people who are diagnosed with autism are capable of doing that? Felice, I'm guessing you're going to have to unmute yourself.
Got it. The numbers are shifting as more people with autism are getting diagnosed, especially high-functioning individuals with autism. Right now, the estimate is between 30 and 40% of individuals with autism likely don't have communication that's available to them. What I mean by that is that they don't really have spoken language and not enough of expressive language skill to talk in the language that we know, which is spoken language. So that would be the estimate. And beyond that, I would say about 60% of the population of people with autism can talk for themselves. Does that help?
That does help indeed. Steve, you've done a lot of investigative reporting, a lot of reporting on autism. You wrote a piece a while back called The Geek Syndrome, and you were running into a lot of programmers in Silicon Valley whose kids had autism. Tell us a little bit about what you discovered.
Well, what I discovered is that at a time when almost everyone was concerned with whether or not vaccines cause autism, I discovered that there was a long and deep tradition of parents with autistic traits having autistic kids, and that the primary thing that's behind autism was genetics. But more than that, what I discovered was that there was a whole generation of people with autism who were creating new methods of communication among themselves, and so finally they could have a sense of community and they could speak for themselves and articulate their own visions of what their lives were like. And this was creating a revolution because for many, many years, autistic people were only discussed as if they never lived outside of clinics and MRI scanners. And what the advent of the internet did was it enabled people who have challenges in face-to-face real-time communication to articulate their own visions of what their lives are like. And in fact, Ari's organization, ASAN, just published a wonderful ebook called And Straight On Till Morning, which is first-person accounts of what life is like with autism or from parents of autistic kids like Shannon. And what you find is a very, very vital and very diverse and thriving community that has a lot to say about the destiny of autistic people.
You know, I want to get more into the technology issues a little later in the show because that's so interesting. But Stuart, I want to touch base with you here. You're the parent of 2 boys, one of whom has autism. And before people with autism can speak for themselves, they have to rely on their parents to do so. What are some of the biggest challenges that you and your wife faced transitioning from parents of a son to parents of a son with autism?
Mostly it was wait lists. We knew right away that we had a child that was over 3 and couldn't speak. So the doctor said speech therapy, but that was a 3-year wait list. And he didn't have the motor control. And so they said he has to go to occupational therapy and a couple other things, or ABA, and it was a 3-year wait list. And at 2.5, when he was diagnosed, that would mean 5.5 before he got any help at all. And so it was put on us to pay for any diets we wanted to try, any therapies we wanted to try, anything we had to do. It was on us to do it and to pay for it. And it was quite a struggle because all we wanted to do was just enjoy our time with him. Of
course, it's a huge emotional and financial burden.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. It changed a lot. In fact, it made us better parents in a lot of ways. But
baptism by fire.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was a struggle, but it was worth it, and he's doing well.
We have parents in our online community chiming in. Angela Yvonne says, as a mother of a child with autism, I find that most interpret his difficulty with comprehension as an inability to learn, when in actuality, he just requires a different method of explanation. So, Felice, I actually want to pose this question to you. Would you agree with what our online community member just said?
I absolutely agree that a different method of communication is what's needed. I think of my own son when he was younger, and his expression really came out through movement and music. We learned early on that Jonah was a great piano player. Now he's very fluent. His language is a bit more pedantic than other folks, but we really needed different ways for him to communicate when younger. And I think that media, for example, social media, has been great for lots of folks with autism, as well as using the iPad. There's a lot of great technology out there that can afford different ways for individuals to communicate in pictures, in words, in movement. I think we're really going to see a great change.
Felice, aside from the technology, though, we know that inclusion, is a very necessary part of intervention. And if that's the case, why isn't it easier to get these kids mainstreamed into the public system?
Inclusion is absolutely imperative, and we've actually shown that time and time again in research projects. I think that the barriers really include how general education teachers are trained to work with kids with autism, how peers work towards including kids who are different as well, and the emphasis on that. And also, a lot of times the kids need some added support from instructional assistants, and the funding is just not there to provide that service, I believe.
I think that's an accurate assessment. Now, one of the things that certainly we believe very strongly is the importance of inclusion across the lifespan. You know, somebody who spent time growing up in a segregated special education school and fought for the right to go to my own neighborhood school, a 5-minute walk from my house, instead of having to go an hour and a half north to a school in which the expectations were so much lower for us. It's always been very important that we speak out to for the importance of inclusion, not just for children, but also for adults. You know, today we have 13 states that have no large state-run institutions for people with developmental disabilities. They're serving everyone in integrated, inclusive, community-based settings. And you have to ask yourself, what is the difference between a state like Oregon or Vermont that have no institutions, right, and a state like New Jersey or Mississippi that have lots of institutions? Well, people are not more disabled in New Jersey or Mississippi. This reflects political will.
Autism is political.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, Steve, I'm sure you've come across this in your reporting, but what's your perspective on it? I mean, my friends who have children with autism, I mean, the theme of our conversations is everything is a fight. Everything that you think your kid should deserve and be entitled to ends up being a fight, and it is exhausting.
Well, I agree. I want to point out another really crucial virtue of inclusion, which is that one of the most serious problems that autistic kids face is bullying. And there was a recent research study that found that something like 60% of adults with anxiety disorders, this is not just talking about autistic people, but all people with anxiety disorders, suffered bullying as kids. And autistic kids they're at particular vulnerability to bullying, and inclusion encourages kids to become familiar with other children who might behave or speak or communicate differently. And that's really important. It's really important that kids learn to become comfortable with diversity in their own classrooms. And if we can prevent bullying of autistic kids early on, then we can prevent some of the other problems that they run into later with anxiety.
Shannon, what are some of the challenges your son has faced? Has he experienced discrimination, bullying, any of the things that Steve was just talking about?
Yeah, he has. My son is a little different from the children we've been talking about so far in that he's actually not in an inclusive setting. He goes to a one-to-one school for kids with what I like to call high-octane autism. He's a one-to-one kid. So, but when he was in kindergarten, he was in a separate autism classroom on a general education campus, and there was little to no support for the kids in terms of inclusion. They were fairly segregated, and one time when Leo had behaviors and accidentally ran into somebody on the playground, a student and a teacher, the teacher, the student's parents, and the principal and Leo's teacher all got together and decided to exclude Leo from recess for the remainder of the year, and they informed me after they made that decision.
I can see that that still hurts you thinking about it right now.
I just can't believe anybody would not find in favor of the child who needs support rather than the child who is not needing support. I mean, obviously, if there's an issue, you need to find out what it is, understand the behaviors, and see what you can do to create a better educational environment, because with respect to the inclusion that we've been talking about, by the time kids are in about third grade, that's when they start noticing people who are different. Up till that point, most kids are pretty cool with kids, with all kinds of kids. And so I really think that in order to lay the foundation for better inclusion in general, we really need to get better and more intensive programs in the early years so that the kids understand that everybody is different and that's okay. by the time they would normally start making that a stigma.
Ari, what are you targeting to help that happen?
Well, I think that's a great question. A couple of things. First, we try and distinguish between simple mainstreaming, which is just dropping a kid in a classroom and telling them to sink or swim, and real inclusion. And we want to teach schools to practice real inclusion, where you're providing education to the other students, you're training the teachers with techniques like universal design for learning, which help support teachers to teach different kinds of learners in the same classroom. We're also fighting for more rights and recognition of existing rights for students with disabilities and parents. One issue we worked on in the National Council on Disability was ensuring that disability was incorporated at the President's Conference on Bullying Prevention. And our recommendation, which NCD is pushing the department to follow up on and issue a Dear Colleague letter to ensure that every family can take this as a point of law into their IEP meeting, is that failing to address bullying should count as a denial of a child's rights under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Every child with a disability has rights under IDEA to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And if a school is letting a kid be bullied to the degree to which they cannot take advantage of their education, or to the degree to which they are sent outside of the general education classroom for protection, then their civil rights are being violated, and we need to send that message. It's a civil rights issue. We have to enforce it as a civil rights issue.
Felice, how effective is peer mediating in these sorts of circumstances?
We have found that it's extremely effective, both on many, many levels, both in terms of the quality of life of kids with autism spectrum disorders, and as well for the peers that participate. We just finished up a multi-site study here at Children's together with UCLA and Kennedy Krieger, as well as Columbia. And our study looked at teaching peers initially to be mentors to kids on the autism spectrum. And we used a fairly open-ended environment where the kids came together for a lunch group. They had fun things to do together. And then for the younger kids, they would go out to recess together with a planned game. And a good example just of the forwardness of how the intervention worked, which was really quite simple, was that we would have all of these neurotypical kids come from the playground to play with the kids with autism. And over time, what we saw is their social networks. That's how many other kids that they were engaging with and saw them as kids to engage with, improved over the course of intervention and stuck. With our teenagers in the same type of program, we saw that the teens with autism said, I'm not as lonely, I have more friends, I'm more willing to go to lunch on my own and hang out with my peers. So in general, I think that's a really great place to put our emphasis, is on peer mentorship and creating more circles of friendship for these kids.
And obviously creating more understanding. And on that note, we are out of time for the main program. But in the post-show, I want to get to how we can change as a society to better understand autism and how we can better serve the autism community. So stick around, because the post-show is going to start in just a minute or two. In the meantime, a big thanks, though, to our guests, Ari Neiman, Steve Silberman, Felice Orlick, Stuart Duncan, and Shannon Rosa. They're all going to be joining us at streamed@aljazeera.com, so we hope to see you there. Welcome to the Streams Online Post Show. We want to get back to the conversation. Ari Naiman, Steve Silverman, Felice Orlick, Stuart Duncan, and Shannon Rosa are all joining us. Steve, from your perspective, how do we change as a society to better understand autism?
Well, for decades, autism was regarded as, the problem of bad parenting or a physical disease, or basically what's happening not only with autism but also with dyslexia and ADHD and several other conditions that have been primarily defined medically, is that we're learning to understand that these are forms of human neurological diversity and cognitive diversity that have helped the whole culture evolve. Autistic people have made great contributions to science and math and music and art, as have dyslexic people and people with ADHD. And the more that we recognize these conditions as different ways of thinking and different ways of being human, we will be able to come together as a society to help people with these conditions with the daily challenges that they face in life.
Speaking of recognizing people as just differently abled but as equal contributors, you have started the Autism Acceptance Month initiative, and you're asking people to take a pledge. Talk about that, Ari.
Well, Autism Acceptance Month is a community celebration that emerged from the self-advocate community, and ASAN launched a website, autismacceptancemonth.org, to help educate people about what it's really like to be autistic and to try and start a different conversation in April. For years, autistic people have honestly dreaded April, Autism Awareness Month, because it's too often full of ideas of awareness that actually spread more stigma. People compare autism to cancer or AIDS and suggest that we would be better off not existing.
And the conversation typically hasn't included people with autism.
Exactly. We've been having a conversation about autism, but without autistic people. So we're asking people to actually take a fairly simple step. Go to autismacceptancemonth.org. And we have a link to a pledge. Click on pledge and take a pledge to only attend autism conferences, panels, and events that actually include autistic people speaking at them and meaningfully involve autistic voices. It's a simple step, it's a first step, more is necessary, but if we send a message as a society that we're not going to give our time or our business to autism events that exclude autistic people, we'll have taken a great step forward.
Speaking about autism, people's voices, I have this book that you wanted me to bring up, and Straight On Till Morning, Essays on Autism Acceptance. So how does this book kind of give a testament to what you were just saying about allowing more voices of people who have autism to speak?
Well, I really appreciated Steve bringing up the ebook earlier. It was just launched, and it features the writings of autistic adults from a variety of different backgrounds, as well as the writings of some members of the autism parent community that share our belief that we need a different conversation about autism. We think it'll be helpful for people that want to know more than just autism exists. They want to be more than just aware of autism. They want to understand, they want to accept, and they want to include.
Steve, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, well, there's a sort of a larger point that I want to make, which is that something that few people are aware of is that there have been studies of how happy the parents of profoundly disabled children are. And the really surprising result of those studies is that the happiness of a family is not dependent on whether or not the child is severely disabled or not so severely disabled. It has to do with their ideas about disability. And one of the great gifts of the autistic community to the parent community and to society at large is a more positive view of these conditions and looking at people's strengths as well as the challenges that they face. And this is not just some, politically correct notion that it's better to respect everyone. It actually influences the way people feel about their lives. And that includes parents as well as autistic people themselves.
Speaking of parents, Stuart, there's a lot of blame often associated with autism diagnoses. What would you like to see happen that would ultimately create a better conversation and better support and better services, not just for kids with autism, but for their families?
Well, professionally speaking, I'm not a professional, so I'm not sure. There definitely needs to be more money for the funding. The services are there. It's just when they have so many children, they put children on a scale of 1 to 100, and number 75 is a little bit more needing than 73, so 75 gets the services, and 73, who needs it just as much, doesn't get anything. For the most part, though, as far as blame and grieving and things like that, pretty much most parents go through that when they very first get their child's autism diagnosis, but they have to realize is the acceptance will come if they will let it. It takes a little bit. It's a little bit of a process that they have to go through, just like anything emotionally. But they have to make, it's not even a conscious choice, but at some point they're going to have acceptance in one hand and fear in the other, and they'll have to choose. And it's not a conscious choice, like I said, but it's going to be one or the other. And if fear takes over, then they're never going to fully accept their child for who they are. They're never going to fully accept autism for being autism. They're going to fight it, and they're going to yell and scream. But if there's acceptance, if they just love their child for being who they are, then they won't talk as if they're not there. They won't try to drug them, even if they don't really need it, just to keep them passive. They won't try to exclude them from certain things just because they might have a meltdown. They'll take those risks, and they'll help their child get through it, and they'll take the precautions, and they'll include their child in everything that they do, because the fear isn't there, the acceptance is.
Shannon? Unmute yourself.
Sure, of course. I agree with Stuart. I mean, my child is, again, Leo, he's a wonderful kid. He's 12-year-old. He has this high-octane autism, and we've been very careful to accept him on his own terms for who he is, for what his strengths are, even though I think a lot of people, just because of negative media conditioning, might see a child like my son and view him with pity or this fear that Stuart was talking about because they don't understand him. But if you take the time to understand that, you know, he likes to chew on straws, and that helps him self-regulate, and that helps him to function, and that helps him to tolerate situations that might be stressful from a sensory perspective, like being in a large crowd or have to wait in a line, then that's a small step that you can make towards autism acceptance. And we also have to be very careful, though, to make sure that we don't push him beyond what he's capable of. We keep trying, like Stuart mentioned, but you know, we understand that there are certain situations that are just, it would be unfair to expect him to participate in those, but we are constantly trying and giving him the benefit of the doubt and presuming competence for him, you know, like Stuart said, not speaking in front of him as though he's not there. And a lot of this attitude comes from good role models in the autism communities, from autistic adults and from other parents. It's really important to seek out positive role models.
Ari, we've got less than a minute left. I'd like you to wrap this show up for us.
Well, I think this is a good example of the kind of conversation we want the media to be having about autism. One that includes us at the table and also has our friends and allies in the parent community and the professional community. That's something that's for too long been absent. And what we have to be doing as a society is shifting the discussion so that we recognize that autism, and really disability in general, are a natural part of the human condition. We belong in the society. We've always been here. We always will be here. And the goals of the nation towards autistic people and people with disabilities have to be about inclusion and equal opportunity.
Spectacular discussion. Thanks to you, Steve Silverman, Felice Orlick, Stuart Duncan, and Shannon Rosa for joining us today. And thanks to you, our community, for sending in so many great comments and questions. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow.